Okay, now we come to the fourth part of chapter 4, supply and demand together. So now we will put everything together. So when we look at the supply and demand, you will find that buyer and seller have a different behavior, right? So buyer have a downward demand curve and seller have an upward supply curve. And then how can they satisfy? So how can they both be better off? So we will talk about the role of the market. The market will make the communication between the seller and buyer, and at last they will reach the equilibrium point. So the equilibrium is a quantity of the good that buyers are willing and able to buy exactly balances quantity that sellers are willing and able to sell. All right. So here it means that buyer are willing to are willing to buy a certain quantity, and the seller are willing to sell a certain quantity, and those two quantity are exactly the same at the equilibrium price. Okay, so we can call that a kind of magic. All right, so at the equilibrium, what will happen? You will find that at one particular price level, the quantity demanded is exactly equal to the quantity supplied, and we call that point as equilibrium point. So the equilibrium price is balances the quantity supplied and quantity demanded. And the equivalent quantity is a quantity supplied and quantity demanded at the equivalent price. And since the quantity supplied and quantity demanded are exactly the same at the equivalent price, so the equivalent quantity is the same for the supply and demand. Right. So let's use a graph to get a more general idea or more straightforward idea. So the market equilibrium is where the supply and demand curves intersect. So you can see what does that really means. So when those two curves intersect, you will find that the quantity demanded is exactly equal to the quantity supplied at that equilibrium price. So here the equilibrium price is $4. So based on the previous information, the for the demand curve, the quantity demanded at the $4 is 7. And then for the supply curve, when the price is 4, the quantity supplied is also 7. So they are exactly the same. It means that the the quantity that uh, 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 the quantity that buyer want to buy is exactly equal to the quantity that producer produce. So there's no waste. There's no waste at all. So the equivalent price is 7. And at this price, 7 ice cream cones are supplied and 7 are demanded. So here, when we talk about the equilibrium, we will always have a situation when supply and demand are not in the equilibrium, and then we will incur the surplus. The surplus is a quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. So sellers respond by cutting prices. So here, the surplus is that there's more supply than the demand at this given price. So in this case, you will see for all the seller, they will find that the inventory is building up. So they have a lot of goods that are produced but cannot be sold. Then seller will say, okay, now since I'm still profitable, then why not to cut prices in order to increase the sales, right? So the seller will cut the price that will increase the quantity demanded and decrease quantity supplied. So what happened? So first we look at demand curve. So when the market price become lower, then more buyer will consider it's a bargain. So they would like to buy more. But at the same time, when the price goes down, become lower, a lot of seller will find not profitable at the new lower market price. So they will exit the market. So those two forces will work at the same time. So the changes represent movement along the supply and demand curve. The prices continue to fall until the market reaches the equilibrium. Okay, at the equilibrium, you will find that the supply and demand are exactly the same. Another situation is a shortage. Shortage is the quantity demanded is greater than quantity supply. So demand is higher than supply. So an example will be the initial launch of the iPhone, right? So at that time, everyone want to buy the iPhone, but there's no supply in the market. So the seller can raise prices without losing sales. So what happened to the iPhone is that at that time, the Apple do not increase the price, but a lot of people purchase the iPhone and resell it at a higher price. So if you want to get the iPhone, you cannot actually get it as a market price. So the market price is actually the price uh, set by the reseller, right? So which is much higher than the actual market price, right? So the seller can raise the price without losing sales because they cannot produce that much. Okay, they cannot produce that much. They increase the price, they will find that the quantity demanded decrease and the quantity supplied will increase. So it means that less people would like to buy with a higher price, but when the price become higher, more seller would like to sell. So those change represent the movement along the supply and demand curve. Eventually, the prices continue to fall until actually the prices continue to increase until the market reaches the equilibrium. So eventually you will find that the price will be much higher, and at that higher price, there's more seller, and at the same time, the buyer are actually deterred by the high price and do not want to purchase that much anymore. All right. So when there's a shortage, the price will goes up. All right. So here is a survey about the price gouging. So the laws to prevent high prices for essential goods in short supply in a crisis would raise social welfare. So you will find that actually the economists' opinion are diverge dramatically. So almost how 1/3 of them think agree with that, 1/3 of them disagree with them, and 1/3 feel uncertain. So for the for the for those economists agree with it, it's not really hard to understand because it seems that if you prevent the high price for the essential good, uh, for the people with ordinary income, they still can purchase those goods and sustain their living. So it means that the social welfare seems to increase. However, if you get a good understanding of the supply and demand in this chapter, you will find that that is not that do not tell the whole story. So consider if the price, if now the market price is already at a very high level, but then the laws actually stimulate the laws kind of require for a lower price. What will happen? You will find that at this lower level, at this lower price, the quantity demanded is very high, but the quantity supply is low. So if the price is low, nobody would like to supply this good. So there will be a shortage. So this stiff price restrictions will lead to a shortage of those essential goods. Then people just cannot get what they need. So do you still consider it is a better situation? So now we come to the law of supply and demand. So it claims that the price of any good adjusts to bring the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded of that good into balance. So in well-functioning markets, surpluses and shortages are only temporary because prices quickly move toward their equivalent levels. So as we talked about before, so if there is a surplus, the price will goes down. If there's a shortage, the price will goes up, and all the price changes. The price actually all moves toward the equilibrium price. So eventually, the market price will be exactly the equilibrium price. Right. So in the previous example, we already talked about what will happen to the supply and the shortage. But here in the graph, it is much easier for us to get the idea. So if there's a surplus, the supply is higher than the demand, then the seller would like to lower the price. When the price is lower until the $4, the supply is equal to the demand, and then the seller do not have incentive to further lower the price because they also care about their profit. Then for the excess demand, whenever there's a shortage, the seller cannot supply the quantity that is demanded by the buyer. So in that case, the seller would like to increase the price. So in that case, more seller would like to provide this this good, and less buyer would like to buy at a higher price. So eventually, when the price is 4, this shortage gap will be closed automatically by the market power. All right. So after we talk about the equilibrium in the static form, static means that there's no change. All right. So after we talk about the static form, then we will move to the dynamic form. All right. So we will look at the shift of the supply and demand given all kind of changes in the economy. So 3 steps for analyzing changes in equilibrium. First, decide if the event shifts the supply or demand curve, or perhaps both. Second, decide in which direction the curve shifts. Third, use a supply and demand diagram to see how the shift changes the equilibrium price and quantity. All right. All right. So here is just a summary of what situation will lead to a shift and what situation will lead to a movement on the curve. All right. So let's look at this one example. So an event that rises the quantity demanded at any price shifts the demand curve to the right, right? So if the demand curve shift to the right, then the equilibrium price and the quantity both rise. Here, an abnormally hot summer causes buyer to demand more ice cream. All right, the demand curve shift from D1 to D2, causing the equilibrium price to increase from $4 to $5, and the equilibrium quantity to increase from 7 to 10 coins. So on the one side, the supplier would like to provide more quantity. All right. So so when there's a shift in the demand, first the seller will consider, okay, we need to increase the price. And when the price increase, the seller would like to produce more. So that is why we move to a new equilibrium. All right. Then we look at what happens if a decrease in supply. So it will lead to the supply curve to shift to the left. So you can see that the price will increase and the quantity will fall. So here you will see that because supply become lower, the seller cannot provide that amount of the supply. So they would like to charge more, and then because of the higher price, the quantity demanded is also decreased. So you can see normally the seller will make a decision of the price, and the buyer will respond to that change in price, right? So like a increase in the price of sugar causes seller to supply less ice cream, right? So you can see that this increase in the price is also consistent with our observation. So if the uh, price of the input increase, the seller need to increase the price in order to make themselves still profitable. In that case, the price of the final good also increase. So we can see this kind of increase in the input price actually transfer to the customers. And then lastly, we will look at the situation of a shift in both supply and demand. Both supply and demand. So a simultaneous increase in demand and a decrease in supply yield two possible outcomes. In panel A, the equilibrium price from P1 to P2, and the equivalent quantity rise from Q1 to Q2. In panel B, the equivalent price again from rise from P1 to P2, but the equivalent quantity fall from Q1 to Q4, and the magnitude and the direction of the change in quantity actually determined by the change in supply and demand. So in the first situation, the change of the demand is much larger than the change in supply. So you can see the quantity increase. But in the second scenario, you can see that the change in the decline in supply is much larger than the magnitude of the increase in demand. So the quantity actually decrease. Correct. So how can we actually analyze this kind of a shift in both supply and demand? So my suggestion is to look at them one by one. So we just look at the supply curve first and then the other curve. Or maybe we can look at the demand curve first and then the others. So it doesn't matter which curve you look at, you look at first. Okay, so they will lead to the same result. Right. So now it's a time for you to do some practice. So please use the three-step method to analyze the effect of these events on the equivalent price and quantity of orange juice. So first, there is a fall in the price of apple juice. All right. So be careful. This is the price of the apple juice, not the orange juice. So it is not a movement on any curve. All right. So apple juice and orange juice are substitute with each other. So if the price of apple juice fall, more people would like to drink apple juice. So they may reduce the consumption of the orange juice. So the demand for the orange juice will reduce. So that will be a shift of the demand curve to the left because it's a reduction. Second, the price of oranges declines because of an abundant orange crop. So uh the price of orange, the orange is actually the input for the orange juice. So if the price of the orange declines, it means that the input price become lower, then the production cost become lower. So the supply, so so it become more profitable for the seller to sell the orange juice. So the supply of the orange juice become higher. So we can see there's a decline of the demand and the increase of the supply. And both event occurs simultaneously. So it means that it doesn't matter you analyze the which point first. All right, so there is a fall in the price of apple juice. The price of oranges declines because of an abundant orange crop. Both event occur. So the step one, both curves shift. The demand shift to the left. Demand shift to the left, and supply shift to the right. Supply shift to the right. So there's one thing for sure: the price will fall. However, the effect on Q is ambiguous. So it determines the magnitude of the shift of the demand curve and the supply curve. So here is a summary of all the possible changes, but I do not suggest you to kind of memorize this table. It is not necessary. So follow that 3-step process to make analysis and draw the graph to see the result. That is much more easier to get the idea, and it will also prevent you from making some mistake. Okay, so we come to a discussion, a conclusion, how prices allocate resources. So in market economies, prices are the signals that guide decisions and allocate scarce resources. So remember here, there's no one have a right to set the price. So we don't have a central planner to set the price. So that is a key feature of the market economy. So that is why we need a competitive market. In other words, it means that no one has the pricing right. So for every good in the economy, the price ensures that supply and demand are in balance. The equilibrium price determines how much buyers choose to consume and how much sellers choose to produce. So the equivalent price is exactly the market price. So this market price is something that the buyer and the seller communicate. So buyer take that price as a lowest price as they would like to buy a good, and the seller consider that as the highest price that they would sell. So both of them uh, use that market price to make their own decision. Right. So we can look at one example and do some discussion. You are watching a national news broadcast. It is reported that a typhoon is heading for the Washington coast and that it will likely destroy much of this year's apple crop. Your roommate says, "This is not going to affect me. I don't eat apples. I only drink pineapple smoothies." As an eager economics student, what's your response going to be? Explain, right? So is it irrelevant? Apple and pineapple, both of them are fruits. They can be considered as substitute to each other. So if the if the if the quantity of apple goes down, then maybe goes down, and if a price of apple become dramatically higher, maybe more people would like try pineapple, and then the pineapple would be more expensive. So in that case, the pineapple smoothies will also be more expensive. Then this event may affect your roommate, right? So B, what other market will be impacted by the destroyed apple crop? How? So there are so many market will be affected, right? So first, for the fruit, definitely, the fruit all can be considered as a substitute. All right. So if people just cannot buy the apples, they maybe try other fruits. Okay. And is there any kind of complement? Complement. So maybe there are some tools to actually make juice out of apple. So since now the apple is not widely available, and then maybe all those squeezer will not will will have a decline in the demand, right? That is a substitute. Uh, uh, and then for the if the apple crop destroy, you will see that there's a huge shortage in the availability of apple, right? So this kind of shortage will lead to a dramatic increase of the apple's price, and that will actually increase the general price level of the entire economy, and that will have the implication of the economy in the future. All right. So the why we need to learn the economics is simply because the economics is a study of the decision. And how do we study the decision? We want to know how one decision will make a difference to other people. So economics is also a study about the relationship among everything. All right. So if you have a good understanding of the supply and demand, you will find that okay, there's a lot of things are actually related with each other. So you cannot see anything or any effect by itself or stand alone, right? So that's all for this chapter. Thank you for listening. Hope you get a very general understanding about this supply and demand, but maybe you still have some confusions. But in the future, we will come to this supply and demand time after time. For example, when we talk about the labor market, financial market, it's all about the supply and demand. So you can get a better understanding when we delve into those individual markets. All right. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you in the next chapter.